Hello, and welcome to The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control. If you are a procurement manager, a fleet operator, or one of the millions of people tasked with a zero-emission deployment goal, this podcast is for you. We speak with industry experts, funding experts, OEMs, and many others to help you stay ahead of this enormous electrification shift underway. Welcome back to another episode of The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control, joined today again by the newly appointed co-host of The Charge Cycle, Connor Whaley. How's it going, Connor?
I'm doing good. Thank you for the honor of being co-host now.
Yeah, excited to have you here aboard for this one and all the future ones. Connor, our OEM and Strategic Partnerships Manager at Emission Control as well. Today, very excited to going to be talking with Trishan Peruma. He's the CEO of the North American contingent of Hubject. Trishan, I'll give you the floor to talk about what Hubject does here in a minute, but excited to have you here. Long stint in the clean energy and clean transportation space already. So far as back with APAC with Shell Australia, has done some work with PodPoint, which is now publicly listed as I understand it, and also done some work at Vericity, recently acquired by ChargePoint, as you probably know, and a variety of other activities. Trishan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Todd. That's kind of good to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Sounds good. Just kick us off a little bit. Give us some context on who you are and where you came from ultimately and how you ended up here at Hubject.
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of my background. I started my career as a graduate at Shell Australia, and I was, as you do on the graduate programs, exposed to all sorts of different work and projects. And at the time, I started getting more involved. I started to see, the industry was transitioning towards EV and electric infrastructure. So I guess when I finished the graduate program, my wife and I moved to London, and I ended up landing at a small startup at the time called PodPoint, working an infrastructure company doing home chargers and public chargers for electric vehicles. Now, this was at 2017, so I think EVs were still, are they going to happen, aren't they going to happen? But I get some good exposure to kind of, how the industry matures. And during my time there, I think, we went past that 5% tipping point and really saw a lot of change in the marketplace. Then for family reasons, decided to move to the US, and I joined another startup called Vericity, which is a telematics and charger management service company, doing software for primarily electric buses, but also electric fleets. And that was super interesting as well, just in terms of taking some of the lessons learned, but also I think the software space, as we can jump into, is super interesting. And we sold the company to ChargePoint in 2021, and had some discussions ongoing with the team at Hubject, who were looking to kind of grow the business in North America. With my experience in some other markets, seeing how the industry sort of matured, I thought, what Hubject is doing is really critical to the scale and the growth of EV in North America. So that's how I ended up at Hubject, and now kind of really excited to be building out the team and the business here in North America, and we're starting to make some good progress in the last 18 months.
Yeah, early adopter of the career path in the EV space right out of school. That's impressive, and great job so far.
Yeah, fortunately, I think I kind of fell into it, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of peel the onion a little bit too on the rationale going from Vericity, where you probably, I'm sure, had an opportunity to do some work at ChargePoint at that time as well. But before having decided to do so, jumping over to Hubject, that's a quite an interesting thing I'd like to peel the onion on a little bit here in a bit. But just maybe in broad strokes, for people that are perusing the Hubject website for the first time, there's a lot to take in there. A lot of different product offerings. We've got a big team. Working internationally now. How would you kind of describe, if you could, Hubject to a fifth grader here? And then maybe also dive into a little bit different, of the kind of relationship between Hubject and then Hubject North America.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hubject, we're a software company. Interoperability is at the core of what we do. We are the world's largest B2B roaming platform. What that means is we basically connect infrastructure providers and e-mobility service providers, so the apps, the wallets of the world, and make it a one simple connection. So globally, I think we have around 350,000 charging points connected. In Europe, we're the largest roaming hub that exists, and in North America, as I said, we're growing. But think of us like an aggregator of charging infrastructure and then the wallets of the app providers, a B2B marketplace, if you like.
Got it. And so that really allows, anyone that's utilizing a local system to travel, to get out of that particular network, use a network that, might have otherwise been excluded from their opportunity to charge in previously just by simply utilizing the platform.
Exactly. The example I often use is, I think I have 9 different apps in my phone, right, with 9 different credit card payments set up for all the different charging networks here in California. And ultimately what we're trying to do is allow the driver choice. So I guess a simple way to put it is the driver chooses the wallet they'd like to use, the way that they'd like to find and interact with the charging infrastructure provider. And then it doesn't matter whether you're using your local charging station that you use all the time when you do your grocery shopping, or you're going on a road trip across the country and you want to use several different providers. That's the ultimate goal, is that truly interoperable experience, which ultimately gives the driver choice. On top of that, we have some other technologies like plug and charge, which I'll get into a bit later, that can really make it a seamless experience for the driver. But at the core of what we're doing, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for EV drivers out there, and knowing that, in addition to having the physical infrastructure, you need to have the digital infrastructure to make that happen.
And just build on a little bit too, is the North American component that with the CEO leadership position you have here is really just to open up the US market more broadly, or is there a little bit of a different tack related to the kind of broader, larger organization?
Yeah, so I guess it's a bit of both. Part of it is to grow our business in North America. I think the timing in the last 18 months is perfect, given that the market's really starting to grow. We've got more players coming in. We may have talked about this when we initially met. For me, the aha moment is when I knew EV was really happening was when I was watching the Super Bowl. I think it was last year, and all the car commercials had gone from ICE vehicles to... It was all electric. I don't know if you remember. And then with the F-150 pickup truck, it was like, yes, it's definitely going to happen, because I just knew people would get into EV. So part of it is kind of helping to work with industry to facilitate that growth at scale. And then part of my role is, we've got a fantastic product that, as I mentioned, is global. I think we're in about 52 different countries, but the US and the North American market has its differences, for better or worse sometimes. But part of my role is making sure that we have a product that fits our marketplace and delivers what's needed for customers, particularly in the US.
And this is a really hot topic right now, this kind of conversation about interoperability, of being able to use your chargers across, or use any charger with your vehicle across the entire country, because that's kind of what people are used to, where you can go anywhere. You can use your phone with Google Pay. You can use, both the software and hardware, being able to fill up your car and use any software anywhere. And that's kind of what people are used to. And now we're starting to get to the point where, people are now going to expect that with EVs. It's not a new kind of niche product anymore. People are really starting to have the same kind of standards as, what they're used to in an internal combustion vehicle, with their experience of using their EVs. How does that kind of color the perception on the kind of the North America market for you right now? This is still relatively new in the EV space. What are your kind of first kind of blank reaction when you came to North America on trying to solve this kind of interoperability problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a little bit of deja vu, honestly. You can probably tell by my accent, or at least some of you can. I grew up in Australia and spent a lot of time in the UK as well at Pod Point. And interestingly, the conversation in Europe or in Australia was very similar around some of just helping not just businesses, but at the core of it, within the business, people relate it to themselves. They relate it to their own driving experience. And I think part of the challenge was really there's a significant behavioral shift with owning an EV to driving a gasoline vehicle, and that resistance was very similar in all markets that I've worked in. And I think in the UK at least, it was the government making some commitments around EV, as well as introducing some incentives. And actually in the US, it was the other way around. It was almost the market saying, hey, this is a great opportunity for us, and the likes of Ford and Volkswagen and some other companies coming out and actually pushing some EV products that got people to really pay attention. But I did notice, I think we passed that 5% of all new vehicle sales being electric last year, or maybe the year before now. I could be getting the year slightly wrong, but I did notice the kind of shift in people's understanding, and also realizing that, hey, owning an EV can actually be more convenient than owning a gasoline vehicle, because now I could charge at home or at the shopping mall, or for significantly cheaper as well. So I think there is some similarities there in just seeing how the kind of perception within the market changes. I think there's a lot of challenges with the market evolving slightly differently. So, Europe, for example, is a highly fragmented market. We talked about the charging point operators, CPOs. There's hundreds, if not thousands of them. If you talk about the e-mobility service providers, there's again thousands of them, and they're separate from the CPOs. In the United States, we've had this, in particular, the market evolve slightly different. Tesla was kind of operating as both the service provider, the app provider, and the wallet, as well as the network operator, and actually the OEM as well, which is a complete ecosystem, right? So you saw that model similarly replicated when other players came in, Electrify America, ChargePoint, and built infrastructure. They said, okay, we're going to offer the app solution as an integrated solution as well. That's not the case in other markets. There's a lot of, very clear roles between different players. So that's definitely something that I guess stood out when I came to the US and started working in e-mobility.
We met at EVS 36 this year here in Sacramento, but that's a roaming EV charging trade show. And it was really eye-opening to see for a group in the EV space who generally thinks that we try to keep our thumb on the pulse of industry on the charging network side or the EVSE OEM side, to really see the host of new vendors really presenting themselves in the Sacramento area was fantastic to see, but also quite shocking. It was it really, I think, implied that there is pretty significant interoperability problems internationally, and to be able to push a new product line or new company into a whole different market, it's a whole new set of not just actors but problems that you guys are trying to address all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And I think interoperability in Europe was addressed slightly differently, because they had cross-border travel was such a big part of the driving experience. Obviously, we still have it here in North America, but it's the distance are much faster, so you don't have as much of it happening. But you still have the within market challenge of again having those nine apps in your phone, a stack of RFID cards that you have to drive around with. Surely there's got to be a better way, and we're in. The industry's moving towards it, but as with any industry, I think we're going through some growing pains as well, even on the hardware side, in terms of trying to address standards and interoperability, and how do we build a market that can scale relatively freely.
So how do you actually look at that? How do you approach that kind of conversation about interoperability between the physical infrastructure and the software side? Because a lot of people, especially in the Bay Area in California, the reliability of a lot of the chargers is the biggest part of the conversation, and some people actually think that it's more on the software side than on the hardware side, where there may be some incompatibility issues with the vehicle. You guys are looking at trying to have interoperability on software side, on a number of third parties coming in and trying to operate on that. How does the difficulty of approaching the interoperability question differ on the software versus the hardware side? Which one is harder?
Again, speaking from a software perspective, I can give you that. I'm sure the hardware guys will tell you that hardware's also very difficult. But in the end, they have to work together, as you rightly pointed out. On at least on the software side, and I think it speaks to hardware as well. One of the ways to do that is to work with industry, so those stakeholders I mentioned, and align on certain standards. And not just align on the standards, but align on how you want to interpret, these digital protocols and so forth, so that every time you're connecting two pieces of software, whether it's via API or standard protocols, you're working in a way that is scalable, right? We want to try to reduce the complexity of these kind of one-to-one large development projects where you're having two development teams sitting down and trying to work out, take 18 months to develop a custom solution. What you really want is something where the industry agrees on some standard protocols, rules of the game, so to speak. And then when you interact with these various players, you can kind of have that conversation, line things up quite nicely, and you condense that development time down to, 2 weeks to a month of testing, and you're good to go. Because as you have more players in the market, as you rightly said, whether it's hardware vendors or even software vendors, we're going to have to connect more people to this ecosystem. And it's not scalable if we're going to spend, tons of time connecting one to one to one to one. So that's where I think standards play a really crucial role.
Where do you see the current state of affairs on that dialogue right now? We hear a lot about OCPP compliance, for example, but we know that there are a variety of manufacturers that don't follow that or that aren't interested in that at that time because they see a different opportunity in the market. So where do you see the next few years going on the standard side of things as it relates to, being able to add more and more and more of this type of equipment to these kinds of programs and systems and software sets?
Yeah, I think it's evolving, right? As I said, I think there's some discussion about it. I think one of the challenges is between kind of what we would say compatibility and implementation. And there's a lot of, hey, we're OCPP or OCPI compatible, but if you open the hood and have a look underneath, maybe a bad pun to use because we're in the EV space now, so there's probably a frunk there. But
look up the frunk. I was just about to say.
But if you do get into the detail, it's about the it's about how it's implemented is really where the challenge can arise, because a lot of these languages are very open to interpretation. So everyone might take them and say, yes, we could do it, and then implement it their own way. But that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So I think we're getting to a space now where there's some forums, whether it be trade associations or just through, commercial partnerships and so forth, that we can start to have these conversations. But naturally, when you're having, this convergence of all these different sectors, really, IT software, the sector that typically was in your phone is now in your car, as well as we haven't really addressed the challenges of integrating now with the utility sector, which is also coming, I think, as we deal with scale. So challenging and evolving is what I would say, but I think we're getting better at getting a little bit into that detail on how you interpret the standards. But OCPP is one of them. There's OCPI, and then in Europe and other markets, we also have OICP when it comes to roaming. And then Plug and Charge is built on what we call ISO 15118. And we're starting to get a lot better at working with partners in the industry to make sure that it's a far more seamless implementation.
Yeah, that's a good pivot, actually. I really want to dig into Plug and Charge, really ultimately what that means, what is kind of different about that concept. I think that was a big push, and a lot of marketing has gone around that dialogue over the last 12 months. And so we'd love to hear kind of, from your own words, what really is Plug and Charge and why it is so really vital for the ultimate scalability, really, of the EV industry.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, the clue is in the name. It's the simplest and most seamless charging experience. I think the easiest way to relate it to listeners in North America is if you've ever hired or driven or you drive a Tesla, when you pull up to the Tesla supercharger network, you simply plug in and the charging occurs. And behind the scenes, you've set up your wallet in your app and it takes care of the charging. When you're done, you unplug and you drive away. That works really nicely, as I said, because Tesla's an integrated stack. They're the software provider, they're the hardware infrastructure provider, and they make the car. But when you start to look at, third-party infrastructure, third-party apps, and different vehicles, you need an ecosystem to manage that. So it's taking that experience and applying it to all other vehicles on the road. So now I think most major manufacturers have announced or will be announcing a plug and charge capable model. And you've also got networks now like Electrify America, like Blink, that have come out and said they'll offer plug and charge. So again, for the customer, I think it's the best experience. We can also get into what it means for fleet, because actually coming from a fleet software company, I think that's where I'm most excited about plug and charge. But from an overall customer experience, I think the way it works is, you set up your wallet in whichever app you like. You pull up to the charging station, you plug in, and the charging starts. The billing, everything else happens behind the scenes. And when you're done, you stop the session and you unplug. But you don't have to pull out your phone. You don't have to pull out an RFID card to do what we call authenticate, which is kind of check that, it's Todd O'Connor at the charging station and not someone trying to do anything nefarious. So it's a really secure way of offering a really seamless charging experience.
Totally.
This is really getting into kind of the middle part of the curve, where we've kind of been focusing on early adopters, and most early adopters in the EV space, they're a different breed, where they will go 200 miles out of the way to go find that one charging station that there was, installed 10 years ago. They'll go that way. They'll plan out the routes and, 3-4 days ahead of time. They'll do all of that work. But, now as EVs are really starting to become more popular, like in California, 1 out of 4, this is an article just the other day, 1 out of 4 vehicles sold in California now have a plug. So we're now really getting away from just that very early part of the adoption cycle, starting to get to that, the vast majority of people where, like my mom is always, it's an example I brought up before, where all she cares about is that she has air conditioning, she has radio, and she has a powered seat in the driver's side. That's the most important stuff. So to have that kind of user experience, not just for the people who are buying the Teslas, buying the high-end vehicles, but because we have to look at the whole market now, having that interoperability and having that ecosystem really improves the experience for the entire market now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think people often compare it to the gas station experience, which, if you really think about it, isn't that nice anyway. I think this is trying to create that driver experience, as you said, where people that aren't that into the industry as we are can pick the technology up and use it without having to, spend so much time trying to figure it out. Because that to me is just another barrier to adoption, right? If it's too hard, why would I change?
Yeah, totally. You got to limit the hassle factor. That is
exactly
key here,
exactly.
right? I think that's true. And you touched on fleets a minute ago. I kind of want to circle back there a little bit as well, because I think the biggest complainers on the hassle factor side of things are often fleets, and certainly the procurement managers and fleet operator management want to do this stuff, but they're dealing with their own hassle factor and chirping from the operators of the actual fleets themselves. So I'd love to hear a little bit more just kind of how you guys are applying a lot of this to fleets, where you're at with fleets on the commercial side here. Just kind of build on that a little bit. I'd love to kind of learn a little bit more about that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of fleet for plug and charge, it's still very, very early, and I think that's largely because of the vehicles that are available. But we're doing a lot of work and should have some announcements in the next couple of months on some partners there. But what's I think when we look at some of the challenges that exist in fleet currently, the first one is really, tracking how you're fueling your vehicle. Now, whether that's gasoline or electricity, I think you still have to figure out, how do I track, fueling in the depot, in public, or anywhere else. And one thing that Plug and Charge does with the being built on the ISO standard is allow you to track kilowatt hours across multiple infrastructure providers. So whether that's charging the vehicle in the depot, whether that's publicly charging, firstly, you can track those kilowatt hours. The other thing it does is it simply replaces the fuel card that a lot of fleet operators have to leave in the vehicle or with the driver. Anyone that's worked in fleet or any fleet business knows that one of the heartaches is really sending out those cards and making sure that the drivers don't take them home, they don't get broken, the card works, tracking and reconciling all of that. Now, imagine if you could effectively use the vehicle as that ID and know that it's safe and secure identifier for that fleet and that fleet operator. That's where I think plug and charge can come in is, again, the driver doesn't need to pull out a card or an app, because we know that a lot of fleets don't want to have mobile phones give their drivers mobile phones. This is a simple way of tracking that vehicle's kilowatt hours across different infrastructure providers.
Yeah, that seems like it's solving a lot of problems. So access to data is huge. It's clearly very important for the work that we do on carbon fuel standard reporting and such. We just had a hilarious conversation the other day with a port tenant in Central California that keeps all of those ID cards currently in his own office. Yes. And has a specific dedicated role to run them out and back during each session, because he doesn't know where they're going to end up. And also, more importantly, because they aren't able to effectively identify, the pieces of equipment that they're trying to charge in that way. So a lot of problems, I think, ultimately being solved there. And, another thing that comes to mind, too, is in the commercial space. And again, port tenants are a great example of this, is it just eliminates another step, and often steps that are highly regulated. There are a lot of, labor unions out there, for example, that are newly being introduced to electrification and not really sure how they relate to fueling when maybe they weren't doing that before at all, right? And so now they're being asked to potentially plug something in when maybe they weren't fueling their vehicles, and all sorts of other weird questions that they have to address. And it seems like that's a whole nother opportunity to eliminate even that whole question as a headache opportunity for a fleet operator and procurement manager.
Yeah, for sure.
So we previously outlined kind of really some of those early products that you guys are doing. Again, specific focus on plug and charge, specific focus on intercharge. We deal a lot in the greenhouse gas reduction world, carbon product world. It does seem like you guys are starting to play in that space or have a product really focused on that around greenhouse gas quota. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about that particular product and how that works and how you guys are relating to it, and go from there.
Yeah, I think, as you rightly said, the focus is really building out the ecosystem, as the market grows. But we do feel that as we get closer to that kind of mass market and more EVs on the road, one of the other powerful things we can offer, our clients is insight into some of that data, anonymized, obviously, but being able to provide reporting functionality and so forth, I think could be quite exciting for us, especially when you're in the fleet world, right? As we mentioned, that's a key component of requirements for fleets, whether it's internally or for regulatory reasons. And I think certainly being able to track the kilowatt hours over different infrastructure providers for a fleet provider could be quite insightful.
So, Trishan, there's a lot to chew on just in the activities you guys are working on. Just interoperability by itself is a big project, and certainly an endless, seemingly sea of new providers, new network operators, new EVSE OEMs, and the like to kind of bring under the umbrella. But conceptually, it makes a lot of sense. So I'd love to kind of hear, where you guys are headed and what's next. What is, if you were looking at a 5-year time horizon, what is Hubject up to? What are you up to in North America?
Yeah, absolutely. So really exciting to be onboarding 5 networks now in North America, and we're hoping to double that next year. So to continue to grow both of our platforms. Also very excited that we should be onboarding our first networks in Canada and Mexico as well, which I think is really cool as we start to get like true kind of cross-border travel in North America for EVs. And then then I think as the platforms get larger, we'll also look at what additional services we can provide, as well as working with partners on. I think Connor mentioned it earlier. Reliability is a huge topic at the moment. The truly crucial part is making sure that it all works seamlessly. And that's one area we'd like to focus on in the next 5 years, is working with our partners to ensure there's that reliability that you can count on as a driver. And that you have a way to charge a vehicle, even if something doesn't work in that chain, there's still a way to charge your vehicle. Because, Connor rightly said, I think early adopters put up with a lot of things right now, and charger reliability is one of them. And they're not that noisy about it. Yes, I know a lot of EV drivers complain in the forums and so forth, but I think it's going to be far noisier when you have non-EV enthusiasts just looking for a car to get them from A to B, and for whatever reason the infrastructure's not, the POI data is not right, the infrastructure is not in the parking lot that they're in, but it's 2 blocks over, or the reliability's not there, it's not the right connector, or charging session doesn't start. Those sorts of things I think we need to work, and we're looking to work with industry to improve on. And then there's I think the really exciting space to look ahead beyond 5 years is all these topics like V2X, vehicle to grid, smart charging. There's a lot you can do in that space once you start having all these players on a sharing the same ecosystem. So that's another area I think we're really excited about working with some of our partners on.
Yeah, as electricity becomes really the fuel of the future here in a lot of ways, the question of interoperability really starts to extend beyond the vehicle, right? There's a vehicle as now a storage asset outside on the parking lot, but you might now have, the similar one installed nearby. You might have a building management system that is equally important. You have DERs at your facility, all of which have this similar sort of interoperability opportunities, I think, down the road. And all in need of a similar sort of resource to help facilitate it all.
Yeah, exactly. There is definitely a cool Venn diagram out there of like automotive, energy, right, tech sectors all colliding to create this kind of quite a unique environment, I think.
Carbon,
exactly. And I would even put your classic kind of retailers and parking lot operators in there as well, right? Like the whole, you've got these industries now going through some significant change. But yeah, you're right. On the energy piece, there's a ton of work to be done, and I think now, especially here in the US, the utilities are starting to do some more things in this space, and obviously it varies depending on how they're regulated. But I could see them playing a big role in the industry going forward for the reasons you mentioned. They're going to be the fuel providers of the future.
Well, and this entire conversation sounds very similar to the 800-pound gorilla, which is the North American charging standard, where everyone's starting to figure out how does that interact with all of the other protocols that are currently out there. How does that interact with existing infrastructure, with new infrastructure? Does that impact your kind of thought of what kind of the next 5 years look like? Is that part of the conversation, or is that something kind of tangential?
Good question. It's definitely part of the conversation. I think first and foremost, Hubject is hardware plug agnostic. So from a software perspective, I think we don't really mind what type of connector it is. But I think it does introduce something interesting to the conversation around standards and interoperability, right? We globally, the CHAdeMO versus CCS plug type debate kind of has been happening for the last 10 years, and I think in the more recent 2 years, I think CCS has kind of won out that battle. Now I'm sure there'll be some people that still believe CHAdeMO will be the future, but I think CCS, at least in Europe, has been settled. The next debate, I think, is both good and interesting. I think it's good because Tesla is the largest network in the United States. So them opening up their chargers to other manufacturers, that's a tick for interoperability, right? For the concern we had about the average EV driver having access to infrastructure. That's great. Now what needs to be done, though, is a ton of work behind the scenes to ensure that the reliability is there. In the interim, are we going to be using adapters? Will it work the same way? To your question as well, site hosts have to decide, okay, do I have a CCS plug? Do I have a CHAdeMO plug and a NACS plug? And looking, if I look to how the next couple of years will transpire, I think those are all conversations that will be had. And I think at least in the short term, you'll have both options. And perhaps there'll be a future where we gravitate towards one or the other. Certainly, again, going back to our earlier discussion, the average EV driver, it's probably better to have one. I think that the jury's still out on whether NACS will live up to how it's worked for Tesla with other brands, because again, it's worked in a very locked-in ecosystem. Now we're kind of taking it out to the rest of the market. Let's see how it performs through the kind of rigorous testing and so forth of having all these different companies now use it. But in terms of an actual experience, when I've driven a Tesla, the NACS plug this has got a good form factor. It's easy to use. If that works for customers, I say let's let the market decide. But I think we're going to be in the next 5 years. I think we're going to have a space where we'll probably have both, and it's going to be a conversation at least with infrastructure providers, and particularly with OEMs that are trying to make decisions that last for 5 years plus. That's going to be the real challenge, actually, on the software side. We do know that the NACS plug is ISO 15118 compatible, for example. So there's some work there that we can do with some of our partners to start to see if we can do things like plug and charge with it. But I think on the hardware side, vehicle and infrastructure, it's going to take some time to transpire. But curious to get your thoughts as well. I mean, from I guess how you guys see it in your industry.
Well, looking at the physical plug for, because we operate primarily in fleet. And when looking at fleets, what we've noticed is that most fleets, they don't really care how the sausage is made so long as it's there at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So if they're looking at whatever the most reliable, whatever's going to allow them to run the routes that they have, and whatever's going to help them do that with the least amount of infrastructure, the least amount of headaches, and the least amount of maintenance as well, that's always what wins out. So, it was a very good point you made, where they're looking at, it's going to be interesting how this is going to roll out, because really no fleets right now that I've talked to have a hard opinion or strong opinion on NACS or on CCS or on anything else, because most fleets are looking at this for the first time.
Yeah.
And they are now starting to formulate their opinion with the ecosystem and with the market conditions that are here today. Mm-hmm. So when they're really starting to make these financial decisions on which vehicles are we going to procure, which chargers are we going to install, which software platforms are we going to use, they're going to start looking at what's most interoperable today, as well as what it's going to be for the 5 years that I'm going to have this vehicle under my lease.
Yeah.
That's the decision-making process that they're going through. And I think the jury's out. I think they'll definitely have some strong opinions in maybe the next few years, but right now, they're still in the learning process.
Yeah. And with, sorry, go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to add to that too. I totally agree, and I think one of the other reasons is that a good majority of fleets that are moving into an electrified space maybe have already had some sort of small pilot, or maybe then after the pilot they've got a smaller, smaller project that might be 10 vehicles, but no one is really turning over a fleet of 500 all at once.
Yeah.
And so there's already a kind of a mixed ecosystem happening at the fleet level, where there is a variety of OEMs on site and a variety of different software platforms being required to be logged into and checked, all with different quality behind them. And so the kind of just intra and networks that are required to be engaged with on a fleet's behalf is naturally occurring anyway. And so I think there's lots of lessons learned that fleets have as they move forward, but they're learning a lot every day about everything from just the form factor and how it might be nicer to have a smaller grip for charging, all the way through what kind of reporting and connections there might be
Yeah.
available through a software platform, all naturally occurring. So I don't see a near term world in which, of a kind of holistic approach is going to be available for a single EVSE or a single platform at any one good facility anytime soon.
I would agree. At least in the short term, I think for fleets and the everyday driver, it does introduce a little bit more complexity because, what does it actually mean in practical terms? But as you said, I think over time that will become a lot clearer. And maybe one thing to add with fleets is as you get to the heavier duty stuff as well, there's even another connector type, right? I think that's recently been launched, megawatt charging connector type. So a lot for fleets to get their head around, but I think that's where we like to look at it in kind of bite-sized chunks and also future-proofing yourself, right? So as you said, with the pilots, that's a great scenario to kind of test out, maybe a few different technologies and see what the best application is for yourself, as well as looking at, making sure from a software standpoint you have protocols and so forth in place that if the technology changes, it's not such a hard thing for you to change with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that brings us full circle here, Trishan. Really appreciate you here on the podcast on the Charge Cycle today, downloading on what exactly Hubject does. If people are looking for more information, either about you or about Hubject or about Hubject North America, where's the best place to send folks?
Yeah, our website, so hubject.com is the best place to go, and you can reach out to us through our website, or even you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just, you can just search my name and Hubject and I should come up. But no, appreciate having me on the podcast, and it was a great discussion.
Awesome. Thanks again, Trishan. For the listener, we will have more information, including that URL in the show notes. Trishan Peruma, CEO of Hubject North America. Thanks again. Appreciate you coming on the Charge Cycle, and for the listener, get out there and get plugged in.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.